This is the Neurosurgery Podcast. Welcome back to the Neurosurgery Podcast. Today, I am simply delighted because we have secured a guest I've been trying to get on the show for a very long time, Dr. George Tolis. Dr. Tolis, a Chicago native, I will note for the listeners, is the section chief of coronary and general cardiac surgery and the director of the network director of cardiac surgery at the Brigham in Boston. And he is a titan in the field in so many ways. But the reason we brought him on today is because he is a great leader and an outspoken voice about the question of surgical training. How do we train the next generation of surgeons? How do we quantify that training and think about it in a realistic and rational way? Dr. Tolis, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the show. Please say hello to our listeners.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Dr. Wang, for being here as well. It's a pleasure meeting both of you. We've never met before. We've never spoken before, other than a couple of back and forths on Twitter Messenger or X messaging, whatever it's called these days. But I'm delighted to be here. The issue of surgical education is a very important issue for me, and I think that started way back in my training days because there are some things that I did not like about my training that I wanted to make sure I do not repeat the bad things that I saw. And obviously, my opinions have evolved these days in the past couple of decades or 23 years that I've been doing this. It's kind of scary to think about it, but it's been 23 years. And I do find that these sort of non-scripted, sort of impromptu discussions are the way to go, the way to discuss, although in this day and age that can be a little bit dangerous. But hopefully we'll all walk out of this unscathed at the end of this discussion. I'm delighted to be here. And I want to say for the audience that we haven't rehearsed anything. We have not discussed any topics that are off limits or structured or anything. This is wide open. I don't know these two fine gentlemen. They don't know me. And we're going to have a nice discussion. And hopefully Monday morning, the key's going to still work on the door.
Well, you can tell that we've never met and that Dr. Tolis doesn't know us if he thinks that we're fine gentlemen. So let's get right into it. So, Dr. Tolis, the question of quantifying surgical training, obviously, it's manifold. And so we've talked on this show several times about work hour restrictions, the implementation of those restrictions, and the evolution over time, and some discussion these days of further restricting duty hours. The impact for surgical trainees. A lot of your papers, which I'll link to for our audience, you haven't focused as much on the hours in the hospital. You actually drill down and talk about what steps do the trainees do in the procedure, what difference does that make, and how do we think about counting cases done versus what steps of the case or doing the whole thing skin to skin for what is a competent trainee at the time of graduation. There's so many ways to think about this. And so I'm just going to kick the can to you. Imagine you have a billboard on the highway where every program director, fellowship director drives by, all of these different aspects of how do we quantify training? What makes a good trainee? What would be your biggest single issue to spotlight to kick off the conversation? And then we'll get into all of it. But if you had one chance to sit everybody down and say, this is what we need to be talking about, where would you start the conversation?
Well, the only way you can get trained hands-on is to be in the hospital. You cannot train hands-on at home. You cannot train hands-on, I hate to say, in a simulation laboratory. You can pick up some hints. You can eliminate or mitigate some insecurities that you might have in the simulation laboratory. But the way to get trained is to be in the hospital. Now, you cannot be in the hospital 24/7 because, first of all, it's illegal in this day and age. And everyone needs a physical and a mental break. So the sort of attitudes that, in the old days, we're in the hospital 24/7. Well, sometimes we were. every other night on call, and Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then basically one Sunday every 2 weeks. You would not set your alarm for 4 o'clock in the morning because you could sleep in. That's not a good system because when you're tired and you're in the hospital, you're not going to learn as much. At the same time, uh, I'm a classical pianist. That's one of my passions. And if you have an extremely talented pianist and someone who's talented but not as much as the other guy, and the very talented guy, you limit their practice to 3 hours a day, but the not so talented person, you let them practice 12 and 14 hours a day. Uh, when it comes to a concert in Carnegie Hall, the not so talented guy is going to be better than the very talented person that could only practice 2 hours a day. That's reality.
Hmm.
So if you spend more time in the hospital, you do more cases, you have more reps, you will train better. I'm not saying that you're not going to be able to catch up in the future. That's a completely different story that we can also discuss. How to catch up many sort of inadequacies that may have been accrued during your training, because they always do. There's no perfect training program. That's a separate discussion. But um, the more time you spend in the hospital, the more cases you do, the busier your program is, the better your training will be, more likely than not. So I don't think that's debatable. So then the question becomes, how do you make sure that you don't spend too much time so that your brain is not fried and you're there but you're not there? Well, I don't think that's an issue these days because of the regulations, you cannot do that, or your program gets in trouble, or you can get your program in trouble very easily if you report the violations of the work hours. So I don't think that's much of an issue. So my biggest concern is that the RRC has adopted these work hours for all fields: neurosurgery, cardiac surgery, psychiatry, internal medicine, and one field is not better than the other. All the fields are extremely important. Internal medicine is extremely important. I'm not sure there's that many people that go into primary care these days and survive being primary care doctors when they finish medical school with $400,000 or $500,000 of debt. But PCPs are extremely important. Addiction specialists are extremely important. And yes, neurosurgeons and cardiac surgeons are extremely important too. However, assuming that the training paradigm has to be exactly the same hours wise for these fields, I think that's a flawed argument. And it's something that is more tailored toward the former, toward medical training, than it is toward surgical training.
Professor Tolis, I'm so delighted to be speaking with you, even virtually. And I'm thinking about, like, we're probably not too far apart in age, like growing up with all the medical soap operas like Chicago Hope and, things like that. You always saw that it was a cardiac surgeon and a neurosurgeon kind of battling it out, right? There's a lot of this drama, the high drama. And I'm not a cardiac surgeon, so you could tell me. In cardiac surgery, it seems like the skill set in terms of speed, time, and efficiency, efficacy is really critical, right? If you cannot sew a bypass quickly enough, it's pump time. There is a real danger if a surgeon is not capable of performing this task under great stress and time stress too, right? Is that correct? I assume that's correct for you guys, right?
It is and it isn't. And speed is obviously something that recently has become important again. We can talk about the historical significance of speed in cardiac surgery, but accuracy is also extremely important, like it is in your field. You can be a very fast and sloppy surgeon. You're not going to get that far in this day and age in cardiac surgery. You can be a very slow, meticulous surgeon where every anastomosis looks right, but it has taken you 4 hours to sew 4 grafts. The heart's not going to enjoy very much coming off bypass, especially if you're 80 or 85 years old. So, uh, and what's interesting with cardiac surgery, since you brought up the technical aspect of it, If you follow the history of cardiac surgery, you can see different phases where where speed has become more important and less important. For example, the first operations that were done in cardiac surgery were done in kids, and they were done by thoracic surgeons, and it made sense for them to do the cardiac operations because they were trained to work on the chest. And as these operations became more sort of complex, initially they were just closing an atrial septal defect or ventricular septal defect, but eventually valve surgery and aortic valve surgery, mitral valve surgery in the 60s. Speed was not extremely important because for the most part these were very young patients and they could take a beating. You would do an AVR in a 45-year-old for bicuspid aortic stenosis. It's not the end of the world if that operation takes 3 or 4 hours. These were not octogenarians. If you're 85 years old and you had aortic stenosis in 1965, they tell you, well, you've lived a good life and you made it through 2 wars, and I would just book a cruise and enjoy the years that you have left. If you tell someone that today, you're going to lose your license, obviously. So speed was not that important then. Then in the 70s, it became very important for cardiac surgeons to become technicians, to become very good technicians because of coronary bypass. So what coronary bypass did in the 70s to cardiac surgeons, it weeded out the surgeons that did not have the technical ability to sew coronaries and to sew them well. Now, that didn't mean they're not intelligent people or they're not academicians, but they simply lacked a technical skill that they were not put through as residents. So they discovered they couldn't do that as attendings. And there was a generation of quote unquote semi-retired cardiac surgeons in the 80s who would do pacemakers because they didn't make it through the coronary era. Then the pacemakers went to EP, but that's a different story. Then as patients became sort of more complex and operations became more complex in the 70s, then speed became important because now you're doing double valves, you're doing double valves cabbages, and you're doing that on young and healthy people, but still you can be on pump for 5 or 6 hours. So cardioplegia came and bailed out many of these people because we found a way to protect the myocardium while it's ischemic in a very efficient way. And myocardial protection with cardioplegia has not changed very much in the ensuing 30 or 40 years. We basically use roughly the same techniques that we used in the 80s and 90s. And then fast forward to the last 20 years, all of a sudden we're doing the same operations, but we're doing them on people in their 80s and on people on dialysis and on people with very poor myocardial function. So speed again has become very important because an 85-year-old is not going to tolerate a 10-hour operation. So we've had in our field these ups and downs in terms of what the necessary skills are and what the skills become obsolete and what skills get reintroduced in the field.
So you almost answered my question, but if you were to say, to me, cardiac surgery is like the razor's edge, right? I remember at Stanford, I spent some time with Shumway. He's a legend, right? And
Yeah.
and it seemed like everybody was terrified of him. But there's the pre-selection. People say, well, I'm not even going to go in that field, right? And then there's the selection process sort of in training, like people, I guess they might wash out or fall out. And then there's, as you said, the selection on the back end where you say, well, maybe I don't do these procedures because, I'm just not of that ilk. I don't have the technical skill set. What percentage do you think is happening? Like how much of it today, like in today's era, you train residents and fellows, is it that there's a pre-selection, there's an intra training selection where you're giving them advisement, and then there's the post-selection when they finish, they're graduated, but they're like, well, I'm not up to speed on this.
So very roughly speaking, and I don't ask me how I came up with these percentages, but very, very roughly speaking, I think that there's a 5% of people that you see them come to the operating room as second-year general surgeons, and they get it. Even though they've never seen a cardiac operation before, you can tell that this person gets it. They can see the field, they understand how to assist.
1 in 20, 5%.
I would say so, something like that. These
Okay.
people are naturally talented, and that's just a God-given talent. This is nothing that they worked on. This is something that they have. There's another 5% that you can tell, man, this guy's not going to get it. And they're smart, they're intelligent, they're hardworking. Some of them really, really want to do it, but you can tell that this is not going to work out. I mean, there's going to be, okay, they may just work the way through the training, but this will never be someone that, I'm going to go to that guy to get my cabbage done. And then there's a 90% where the rest of us belong, that with various sort of interventions and, training and so on, we figure it out and we are safe, sort of functional cardiac surgeons. So I think the vast majority of people can do it, assuming that they place themselves in the correct environment and that the politics that are prevalent during their training are not very disruptive, and they can go ahead and train the way they should.
So talk a bit about that selection process, the match for residency or then for fellowship. I don't know how fellows are chosen and find an institution in cardiac surgery. In neurosurgery, some of our subspecialties are moving towards a match process. Most are still traditional interviews and one-on-one application process. But talk about that process of fitting the trainee to the training environment, because obviously there's a lot of double blind with this game, right? Much like today's conversation, you meet somebody for 20 minutes and you have to figure out so much about them. What is your algorithm, either conscious and explicit or unconscious and intuitive, that you've developed now to think this person will do well here?
Full disclosure, this is my personal opinion. This is not an institutional opinion. This is probably different than the standard academic institutional opinion, but this is my opinion. Uh, First of all, grades. I think grades are extremely important, not because they show intelligence. What grades to me show is an individual who is disciplined, an individual who is willing to study hard a subject they're not interested in, and to perform well in a test in a subject that they're not interested in. Someone could argue, why do you need organic chemistry? To get an A in organic chemistry and a C in organic chemistry sort of kills your chances of getting into medical school. Well, I don't think it's the subject that is the issue here, but the issue, this is an individual who at age 20 or 19 is disciplined enough to tackle a subject that they don't like, they don't find interesting, and to do very well in that class. And that is a skill that you will need as a physician, as a surgeon, for the rest of your life. How many times do you do things during the day that you don't like, but you have to do them well? It's very common. And I think that by looking at people that have good grades, you weed out people that pick and choose what they're going to do. Now, there's a place for these people too, but I don't think it's in surgery. In surgery, you're going to be asked to do tons of things that you don't enjoy doing, that you don't like doing, whether it's, there's many things that I'm sure you do during the day that you don't want to do, yet you have to do them very well. The second thing is, talking to that person in an interview, not on a Zoom interview. And that's what I learned during COVID. If you see someone in front of you, you see how they talk, you see how they carry themselves, you think to yourself, is this someone that I want to have a conversation with at 3 a.m? Is this someone who can have a conversation with the family of someone that was doing great up on the floor and just died? Is this someone who has the emotional intelligence to handle situations that we handle every day? And I think that the interview is very good at doing that. Letters of recommendation. There are keywords in letters of recommendation from various people that write them that I think are also very helpful when it comes to that, because you can distinguish between empty platitudes versus real stuff. And personally, letters from like extremely well-known people, and that people try to get in order to embellish an application. Unless I know that person, I can pick up the phone and talk to them. To me, that doesn't mean much at all.
Hmm.
Um, the the one thing that I disagree with a process that unfortunately we put too much weight on today, and especially in neurosurgery and in pediatric surgery, and to a degree in cardiac surgery as well, is the amount of research that residents do and how many papers and publications they have. I think it's great if someone has had a true interest in a field and they have a PhD in neuroscience and so on and so forth. But uh, forcing someone to take 2 or 3 years off to work in a lab to publish in order to strengthen their application, in my opinion, that doesn't make someone a good future neurosurgeon or a good future cardiac surgeon. And unfortunately, this is something that you can do without in this day and age. I don't think that someone can go straight through and get into a solid sort of program in neurosurgery or cardiac surgery or pediatric surgery without doing research. And this is something new. I went straight from kindergarten that I started in 1975 till I finished my cardiac surgery residency in 2002, and I never took a year off. Between college and medical school and general surgery and cardiac surgery. And I think that's something that today you cannot do, no matter who you are. And I think that's wrong, because if you want to do research because you're interested in it, then absolutely that should be part of the deal. But it should not be part of the deal if no one's even going to look at your application unless you've done research and written papers. And what we need to remember is people in academic centers, the vast majority of care in this country is delivered in non-academic centers. So it's our obligation to identify who is truly interested in academic surgery, but it's also our obligation to train people that will be very good practitioners out in the community.
Professor Tolis, I was talking to Chris Shaffrey, who you may not know, but he's a very famous double-boarded ortho neurosurgeon who has been president of every society in spine and a good friend of mine. And he was talking about training, and he was indicating that the American College of Surgeons, and this is for the field of general surgery, this is not cardiac surgery, this is not neurosurgery, just general surgery, had statements that at this time in history, right now, that full on 50%, roughly half of all trainees in general surgery are completely unqualified to perform even the most basic tasks in general surgery. The most basic, not anything complicated, appendectomy. And this was a statement made by many folks who are in power and empowered to make those statements. And I don't know if it's entirely true. I don't know if it's validated. But do you find this to be like, this is certainly something new to them, right? This was not the case 30 years ago, right? In general surgery, for sure. Do you think that this is a real thing? Do you think this is alarmist? Do you think it's because the standards are higher or there's too many procedures to know? What do you think is really going on? Do we really have an issue here with training, or is this something that is being manufactured and is more political?
Well, no, I don't think it's political at all. I think it's very real. I don't know about neurosurgery, but in cardiac surgery, if you look at what people do after they finish their programs and what they used to do 30 years ago, that answers your question. In excess of 90% of graduates in 1990, 96%, I think, I don't want to make up the number and have someone write a nasty comment that I made up a number, but it was in excess of 90% that they would just go on and practice. Today, more than 50% of grads go on for quote unquote further training, be it TAVR or be it aortic surgery or all that stuff. Now, you could argue that that's because the field has become very specialized. But you could also argue that the reason for that is because if someone can get a good job, they're going to get a job. They're not going to go for further training. You can get, if you finish a solid program, you can see and do these cases very well without doing further training. Uh, Again, there's the people that go for further training because they have a spouse who's in a different town and they want to sort of take another year until they figure out where they go. But I think these are very rare cases. By and large, we have shifted from graduating people that need to be sort of battlefield ready by July 1st. And we have shifted from that to someone who is done in your program and then go somewhere else to retrain or to learn things that they should have learned in their original program. And I think that is scary, first of all, for the field, number one. But I also think that is very unfair to the trainees to have invested all these years in the research years, like we said. They're not finishing at age 32 anymore. I was all done myself at age 32. I've been an attending, and I'm 55 now, so I've been an attending for 23 years. I think it's very rare for someone today at age 32 to be board eligible in cardiac surgery. So we're taking these folks that are hitting close to 40 and we're telling them, well, I'm afraid you're not ready to practice yet. So we are shifting from the American model that has worked very well in the 60s and 70s and 80s to the European model. In the European model, you're getting cardiac surgery, at least I'm not sure how it is in neurosurgery, but you're given a piece of paper that you're a fully trained cardiac surgeon. And then you have to tag along with some big professor and open and close for them and hopefully pick up some hints from them over the next decade and wait for them to either go somewhere else or die or become incapacitated and then take their job when you're in your late 40s, early 50s, something like that. So I think we are rapidly approaching the same sort of model in this country. And I'm in disagreement with that. I think that the old model, where you would hold a program accountable to train someone and make sure that they can do it, that was a very good model. And that's the Shumway model. I mean, Shumway was known to be one of the best teachers that have ever gone through this program. And his saying was that I'm the best first assistant in the country. And we have gone from that to graduating people, giving them a piece of paper saying you're a trained cardiac surgeon, you can sit for the boards, but I'm not sure that they are.
So, as we bring this to a close, I'm going to throw the hottest potato I can imagine at you.
Go for it.
But also, perfect. But also, I will leave it somewhat open ended because you you you've said a number of times during this conversation. I'm only speaking for myself. This isn't my institution's opinion, and so forth. But I think a majority of the issues we've discussed today, the duration of training, the difference in the needs for training, and the style and culture of training between different subspecialties within medicine, the filter of selecting someone to train with you, and then the filter at the back end where are people really ready at the end of training? All of this amounts to, or at least a potential way to start solving these problems amounts to, willingness to say there's a problem here and to say so in public and to say to someone there's a problem with the way you're performing, let's get you better, or I don't think you're a good fit for this institution or this field, let's find a better fit for you, or hey, you're painting with a broad brush and you're putting these restrictions on surgical trainees. We're not better, but we're different, and maybe we should be treated differently. And the willingness to say that in public when you know it's not a popular idea, it can be very difficult to do that. Individuals feel risk to themselves, their career, their livelihood in doing that. And yet, here you are doing just that. You've done it in writing on several occasions, as I mentioned, that I've read and enjoyed. You've done it on X with spaces that I've been part of before. And now you're doing it here to an audience of neurosurgeons, while simultaneously you are a prominent academic surgeon in a leadership role at a major institution. So, whichever one of those threads you want to pull, but in general, maybe as we close this conversation, talk a bit about your personal willingness to be outspoken against the tide of both popular opinion and even your own institution's opinion in this academic arena.
Um, the only way I can act is to speak my mind, unless that becomes very offensive for the recipient of the comments. And we always need to be sort of aware of that because some people may have very special sensitivities about issues. And I mean, you're not going to walk down the street and see someone who's obese and tell them and not know them and say, "Why are you so big? You're going to have a heart attack." I mean, that's like the extreme example of this. So that is not being outspoken. That is just being inappropriate.
Right.
But on the other hand, unfortunately, the path of least resistance, which is what most of us do, is not to address this issue because you don't want to become unpopular with your institution. You don't want to become unpopular with the residents because, if you tell a resident that you're not ready, they're not going to like it.
Right.
If you tell your kids, you can't play video games, they're going to be really, really upset with you. But, 10 years later, they're going to say, "Thank you, Dad, for not letting me be a moron and play video games 24/7." But if your kids could go to DHS and report you for not letting them play video games, you could get in trouble. But you're not disincentivized to do that. At the same time, if you make a trainee very upset, believe it or not, they can get you in trouble very easily. So the path of least resistance today is not to bring this up and to just let it go. I know how to sew coronaries. You want to learn how to do it? I'm happy to help you do it, but I'm not going to get in trouble. That's sort of the advice that your spouse gives you when you come home and you tell her what happened. I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that's good enough because my obligation is to train you. And I'm not using this as an excuse to abuse you. I've been abused too as a trainee, and I know exactly what being abused means being on call all night, looking for a CAT scan all over the place because they didn't used to be in the computer when I trained. I'm dating myself. And then finding out in the morning that the CAT scan was in the trunk of the attending's car, who showed up in the morning after you spent all night looking for that CAT scan. And they said, here it is. And by the way, that attending also has a major position in one of the societies and talks about, education and, resident advocacy and all that stuff at their later years. Let's just not get into that for now. But so I know what abuse is. People from our generation know what abuse is. But in this day and age, it's very easy to equate abuse to interest and tough love. And that can get us in trouble. And in this day and age, it's very easy to get in trouble. So many of us choose to take the path of least resistance, which is, well, we're all friends and everything's going to be okay. And if you can't get a job and are doing locums after finishing your training, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. That's not good for me. That's a non-starter for me. So hopefully, while staying civilized, you can find a good group of residents and attendings and do the right thing by the trainees.
Well, phenomenal. Thank you for sharing these and all of your opinions in the last half hour. I'm still working on the staying civilized part, but I'll get there eventually.
Aren't we all?
As are we all. But these are real issues, right? Because I think about um, when I one day need doctors and surgeons to take care of me, hopefully for nothing extreme, but we have a sacred duty to replace ourselves and to keep this tradition of medicine going. I'm obviously behind both of you on this road, but as we often say on this show, Dr. Tolis, many people want to be surgeons, but no one wants to become a surgeon, which is hard and is painful and does take tough love and being pushed outside of your comfort zone.
Well, let me correct that for you, just to interrupt you. There are people that want to become surgeons, but we need to identify who they are.
Right. Yes. That is a good correction.
And
Many.
we need to be given the tools to identify who they are, not be restricted by. We are extremely vulnerable on a day-to-day basis, and we have to operate on brains and hearts. That is not for me at least, is a pretty stressful thing to operate on someone's heart. I'm sure it is for you as well.
Yeah.
It is so easy to follow the path of least resistance, but I don't think it's a good path. It's not good for the next generation.
Amen. Dr. George Tolis, thank you again for your time speaking with us on a weekend. For our listeners and people watching, I'll link to your X account as well as some of these papers you've written about surgical training. Thank you again for being so outspoken, fighting the good fight. Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
very much. Nice to meet you.